Hi, and welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. My name is Shiro Bergbauer. I'm a wife, mom, and certified registered nurse anesthetist. I started this forum to create a community for women in medical careers with the goal of providing them with tools and information to help them navigate the transition from clinician to working moms. On this podcast, we discuss various issues ranging from the journey to motherhood, being a mom, parenting, marriage, and everything in between. No topic is too small or too big to be addressed. My objective is to allow moms to be vulnerable and also promote wholehearted living. I love this definition of wholehearted living from author and researcher Brené Brown. She says, wholehearted living is about engaging with our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging. So welcome to the podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. Happy Monday, and welcome to this week's episode of the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I am so honored that you're here. So thank you for allowing me to hold space for all of us as we explore our motherhood journey. So today I want to talk about something that we lightly touched on the last couple of episodes where I hosted Dr. Benuto, and this is the concept of the good enough mother. So as usual, I'm going to start with a story. So the other day, I was speaking to a friend who has a 9-month-old, and as we were talking, she said something to me that I thought about well after the call was over. And she made this comment about the fact that she had been following a certain mom on Instagram, and she had started to feel less than because she wasn't doing as many other activities with her kiddo as this mom was. And nothing against this particular mom that she was following and nothing against the mom that I was speaking with. But what I realize is that especially now that we have had less physical contact with other people and we're getting to see more people on social media and just see how people are living out their highlight reels, it's so easy to get caught up in the comparison game and also get caught up in thinking that we're not doing enough. What I want to introduce is the concept of the good enough mother, and we'll explore a little bit about the history of the good enough mother and where that came from. And we're also going to talk about how you can explore your own motherhood journey to create that version of yourself that you can define as being good enough. By the end of this episode, I would like you to feel empowered because you've learned how to show up as a good enough mother, which will allow you to give yourself grace and parent with intention. As many of you know, the genesis of this podcast and my brand is parenting with intention and connection and being imperfect. And so this episode is testimony of how I strive to parent every day. I don't always achieve it, but I intend to do it every day. And when you set intentions for yourself, the universe aligns it in a way that you end up doing what you set out to do. So please welcome this week, and I cannot wait to hear what you thought about this episode. Please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you're listening on Apple or on Spotify. I would really, really appreciate it. So let's get started. As I thought about the conversation I had with my friend, something came to mind of a conversation I had with another friend of mine when my daughter was about 3 months old. And we were just talking about milestones and how to explore, their growth and development. And what ended up happening was my friend mentioned sensory play to me. And to be completely honest, I had never heard of this concept. And so I started doing the research and figuring out how to do sensory play. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so behind. I'm just not getting caught up. And how am I going to, catch up, basically, quote unquote. And what I realized as I was going through this process was that my daughter was making her milestones anyway. And I didn't need to always be doing the things that were in vogue or the things that other people were doing in order to get there, quote unquote. And when my daughter turned 1, I met this amazing guy, one of my patients, and he said to me, I know you have a little girl. You've told me about your daughter, and I just want you to think about being a good enough mother. And I had honestly never heard of this concept. And he was like, yeah, there's, a psychologist that came up with this concept, and you really should look into it. And so I obviously went and did a little research, and the phrase "the good enough mother" was coined by British pediatrician and psychoanalyst Dr. D.W. Wincott in his famous book, Playing and Reality. So he took a softer approach than Freud in his views about the role of parents, and that actually made his teachings more popular with parents at the time. What he did was that he recognized the need for children to realize that a mother is neither good nor bad, nor the product of illusion, but is a separate and independent entity. And so the good enough mother starts off with an almost complete adaptation to her infant's needs. And as time proceeds, she adapts less and less completely. Her failure to adapt to every need of the child helps the child adapt to external reality. Basically, what his teachings boiled down to was the fact that a good enough mother was better than the perfect mother. He wanted to bring in this idea of, as a mom, being intuitive to your child's needs, but also allowing your child to slowly and slowly separate from you as an entity and being their own independent person, but also allowing you room to be imperfect. What he basically passed on was that you don't need to be the best mother, quote unquote, to raise a psychologically healthy child who feels loved and nurtured. You simply need to be good enough. A good enough mother who takes care of your baby's basic physical and emotional needs. And if your baby feels overall safe and loved, he or she will be able to tolerate and forgive your imperfections, right? So our babies are not looking at us looking for the best version of this perfectionist mother that is going to meet their every need every second of the day. You don't put them down to go to the bathroom because that makes you not perfect, or you don't show up everything that they go to, because if you don't show up, then you're not a good mom. And just allowing yourself to be good enough. I wanted to share a few key points as far as how we as mothers can embrace this concept of the good enough mother and also allow ourselves to parent from that imperfect stance. And please hear me out here. I am not embracing the theory of just like half-assing motherhood. That is not exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to introduce is the idea of parenting from a place of imperfection and giving yourself grace and doing the best you can every single day and doing the best you can with the information that you have at this time. The first thing I'd like us to explore is a mindset shift that needs to happen. When I think about being a mother and the idea of being a perfect mother, I think about, just abundance, right? And I'm going to share a quote by author Lynn Twist. She wrote the book, The Soul of Money, Transforming Your Relationships with Money and Life. She says, for me and for many of us, our first waking thought is, I don't get enough sleep. Then the next one, I don't have enough time. Whether true or not, that thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. We spend most of the hours and the days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. Before we even sit up in bed, before our feet touch the floor, we're already inadequate, already behind, already losing, already lacking something. And by the time we go to bed at night, our minds are racing with a litany of what we didn't get or didn't get done that day. We go to sleep burdened by those thoughts and wake up to that lack. This internal condition of scarcity, this mindset of scarcity, lives at the very heart of our jealousness, our greed, our prejudice, and our arguments with life. What she tried to introduce is the idea that when we already operate from a place of lack, so we don't have time, we're not good enough, we are not worthy, we are not showing up as we perfectly envisioned ourselves to be, then we are not allowing ourselves room to be who we actually were meant to be. We're showing up with a preset that we can't achieve, right? Recently, I had a mom ask me, how do you get everything done? And I had to really think about a way to respond to the question in a very nurturing way. But I was very upfront about the fact that intentionality with time is key in motherhood. I joke a lot about, screen time and how much people spend on their phones and how much time people spend scrolling social media. And when I think about that, I think about the fact that nobody goes into Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media platform and says, I'm going to spend 5 minutes, and actually spends 5 minutes, me included. When I started being more intentional with my time, I started looking at time as an infinite supply. And we all have 24 hours in a day, but I started looking at that 24 hours in my day as something that I can every day strive to make the most use of, to get enough rest, to get enough time for creativity and play. One of the things that the author talks about is that addressing scarcity doesn't mean searching for abundance. It's choosing a mindset of sufficiency. So good enough isn't settling. And I think that's how some people think of this idea of the good enough mother, that, oh, you just want to be good enough, like you're just settling. And it's not settling, it's sufficiency. She suggests that sufficiency is precise. Enough is a place that you can arrive at and dwell in. So often we think of abundance as the point at which we'll know we've really arrived. But abundance continues to be elusive. If we think of it like we'll find it some excessive amount of something. Like, okay, if you want to have abundance of time or abundance of joy, you're always looking at it as a destination. When you arrive at the place of good enough mothering, it's a place where you can still be your best version of yourself and be appreciative of what you have and what you've arrived as a mom, but also nurture who you are as a human and also nurture your children. And so it's not an elusive destination where, okay, now I've gotten here. Now what's the next best thing? Like sometimes we always have to sit in that comfort or discomfort and just accept what is for what it is. The other thing about this mindset shift is the idea of gratitude. And gratitude is not, it's not a place we are like chasing. I feel like we so often get caught up in the culture of toxic positivity where people tell us, well, you should be grateful you have this because other people don't have that, or you can't be upset because, you have such a good life. And I approach gratitude from the thought of, what I have is, and what I don't have isn't, and those two can coexist. And so I allow myself to embrace what is working in my life and what is great and what is good, but I also acknowledge what isn't. Because if I ignore what isn't great right now, then I don't have a set point to look at for where I want to be. And the problem with toxic positivity in our culture is this idea that, gratitude and frustration cannot dwell together. Grief and frustration and gratitude are mutually exclusive. And I beg to differ. Acknowledging and allowing yourself to feel can coexist with gratitude. You embrace what is working for you and you embrace what's amazing in your life, but you also acknowledge what isn't. And in doing so, you can actually allow yourself to compare. When one year I had this amazing year and these things happened, so I know like my current situation is not permanent. So when you're grieving, when you're going through pain, having that gratitude reminds you of what has been and is possible, but it doesn't negate what is currently happening. I caution people about, like in COVID season, for example, when people say, well, at least, you're healthy and you have a job, and moms are going through this thing where they're trying to homeschool their kids. They're trying to run a household and work full time. And we're telling them, oh, just be grateful. And so the idea of accepting what is and allowing yourself to feel is so important in this mindset shift. So the other thing that I really ask you to think about is identify your external sources of scarcity. Is it other moms? Is it mom shamers? Is it social media? Is it your family? Is it your spouse? Is it your in-laws? Whoever it is, identify that and put a word to it. Because if they're making you feel less than, then you have to control the narrative for yourself. And nobody is going to make you feel any way unless you let them. But you have to identify where it's coming from, where the noise is coming from. And I call it noise because it has no function for you. But you have to really, really reel yourself into it and think about, okay, is this a source of scarcity for me? And how do I tune that out? And how do I remind myself that I am in charge of how I feel, and I'm not going to let society tell me how else I can parent. I'm not going to let, mommy shamers tell me, well, your kid's doing this, well, they should be doing that. I'm not going to let Pinterest tell me I'm not doing a great job as a mom. So identify that and put a name to it, because it's so vital for you to know the things that are making you tick. So the other thing I want to talk about as far as mindset shifts is social media. And the thing about social media is there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I have been the recipient of the great of social media. I have made so many connections as I started building this community, connected with so many of you through social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's been a great experience for me. What I try to look at it, social media, is you curate your consumption and you curate the people you follow. And if anybody you're following makes you feel that you're not meeting certain goals in your life, allow yourself to unfollow them. It's nothing against them. If you've read the Four Agreements, you know that Don Miguel Ruiz says, don't take anything personally. Don't take anything personally. It's not personal. So if people unfollow you, don't take it personally. If you unfollow people, they shouldn't take it personally. Or rather, don't feel this like obligation to consistently, consume content from people who make you feel that you're not enough, because you have to curate that experience for yourself. Don't get into groups that allow you to wallow into, I'm not good enough. Look at all these moms and they're doing X, Y, and Z. Social media has so much to bring, and you have to decide where you want to curate your experiences for yourself and where you want to use as a mirror. And, as I build this community, I go back to something that I learned from somebody who mentored me before. And she said to me, your brand is a reflection of you, but it's a mirror of your clients. I want to reflect the parent that I want to be. It doesn't mean I'm 100%, I have this like, oh, I'm good enough every day. I have self-doubt, but I want other moms who I mentor and who I'm nurturing to look through the reflection that I'm creating and see themselves. And so I want to build a community where mothers feel welcome and mothers feel that they are exactly where they need to be in their motherhood journey and that they're enough. I also challenge all of us as we share our experiences and we share our vulnerabilities on social media to be consistently aware of the fact that even though we consistently say social media is a highlight reel, it's very easy for people to ignore that thought. So when you share your experiences, be real about who you are and what's happening in your life, because people are looking and they're like, oh, look, she got to go on this vacation and she got to do this and she got to do this. And they don't see the bad days. And I'm not saying, put out all your life out there, but maybe be cognizant of the fact that if you're only ever showing the amazingness of your life, then that's what people perceive as is happening in your life. So then when you show up and you disappear for a month because you're going through a difficult time in your life, and then you're like, well, nobody's reaching out to me. It's because those people have this idea that your life is perfect. As we curate our experiences online, I think it's important that we are aware of how those experiences are perceived by other people, and that we take ownership of the fact that who we show up as in social media is not always who we are as people, especially in the era of cancel culture. People say one thing and then they show up as a certain thing and people get all wound out about it. And my thing is, I don't want you to place your value as a human being on your social media persona. So let me step up my soapbox by saying that I actually believe social media has created so much connection for me in the last year. And I've met so many amazing people, but I've also been, at the receiving end of negativity and, people saying, hateful things to me. And I just take it with a grain of salt and I don't take it personally. And that's helped me a lot. I remember I posted something about outsourcing and somebody who I didn't even know made a comment on my post, and my sister was very upset about it. Rightfully so. She's protective of who I am. And because the person didn't know me. And what I realized is that I had to take ownership of how I showed up in that post, because regardless of whether the person knew me or not, if they perceived it a certain way, I still had to take ownership of how I was being perceived. I didn't take it personal, the things that they said to me, but I made it very clear that the person I am is not going to tolerate that behavior on my platform. If they wanted to have a one-on-one conversation, I was happy to engage them. But if they wanted to be ugly and hateful, then I just was not going to create space for that. So that is the ugly of social, and it does happen. But For all of you who follow me on social, for all of you I've connected with on social, I am so grateful for you because I've been able to like just make so many friendships with people. And I just feel like our community as mothers has room for expansion. And when we create community, we create space for other women to connect with us. The second aspect of good enough mothering is the idea of self-compassion. And so what I'd like you to think about is when you think of yourself as a mom, what comes to mind? Do you find yourself questioning whether you're doing enough? Do you compare yourself with other moms? And then what I want you to think about is what are your expectations of motherhood? What do you expect of yourself? Like at the end of the day, when you have to give yourself a grade, what defines whether you did a good enough job as a mom? And for me, mine is pretty simple. If my kid is loved, clothed, fed, and clean, I've done my work. As if my kid feels that she's seen and secure and safe, my work is done. I don't have to give her this like phenomenal experience of, we're crafting and we're doing all these things because I've given her the basics. I've given her the basics of who she is as my child, and I've given of myself who I truly am authentically as a mother. I want you to think about your expectations of motherhood and ask yourself, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you are not willing to do or not do in order to make sure that you have showed up for yourself and for your family as the best version of yourself? So for me, for example, if my child is sick, I am not negotiating. I have to be there for my child. I will apologize if I can't show up somewhere. If my child needs me to be emotionally connected to her at that specific time, that takes precedence over everything else. Now, if my child needs to have this superfluously created experience of crafting, I'm just not going to do that because I'm not a crafter and I'm not doing it. So if other, kids show up and they have better things than my kid did, I did my best and that's that. But if my kid's sick, I'm not negotiating. I am going to parent and I'm going to be there for her and everything else comes secondary. So I just want you to think about that. The other thing, as far as good enough motherhood goes, is the idea of allowing our kids to feel frustration, feel all their feelings, and allowing them to be self-sufficient. I had a conversation with my therapist a while back, and I was just discussing how, I feel that, you want to protect your child and make sure they don't go through the pains and this and this. And, if you and your spouse are having a conversation, you don't want them to see you arguing. And my therapist said something to me that was so profound. And she said, you cannot protect your child from the world. And what that means is that I have to be able to give her a real-time view of how life works. I have to be able to give her a real-time idea that not everything is always going to work in her favor. The world doesn't revolve around her, even though it does in our household. People out there might not always be kind to her. And this is how she should respond to it. Now, if I set up my child with the idea that everybody is just, loving and kind, I'm setting her up for unmanageable expectations. And so one thing my therapist said to me, which I thought was so interesting, was that my husband and I had had a heated discussion. I was just feeling so much like angst about it because I was like, oh my God, she heard the conversation. And what she said to me was, well, no, it's okay that she heard. But then you also mentioned to me that when the conversation kind of cooled down, you guys reconnected and gave each other a hug, and she was able to see that. And what she said to me was, you're teaching her that discourse is normal. It can happen, but you're also teaching her that people come back together and make peace. Now, she said something that was so funny. She goes, people who've never seen their parents like disagree and then they go into a marriage and the first time they have an argument with their spouse, they're like, great, it's over. It's over. It's over. I've never seen this. This is it. We're getting a divorce because they just, it's expectations management. They don't expect that they can disagree with their spouse. So back to motherhood and our kids and allowing them to feel, we have to allow them the experience of being human and also giving them the capacity for empathy, because sometimes I think we want to hide how we're feeling if we're flustered. And I think it's very important for them to be aware of normal human feelings. Like We're beings, we're feeling beings, right? So we're not always happy, we're not always sad, we're not always mad. And for them to see that variance of relational experiences and emotions, I think is so important in us being able to humanize ourselves as mothers and just showing up as who we are. The other thing is defining your yardstick. And I did visit a little bit of this as far as social media, but what is your yardstick? Like, what do you use to measure? Did I do good? Okay. Or today I did X, Y, and Z, but then my friend Janet did X, Y, and Z. So now I don't think I did a good enough job. Define your yardstick and allow that to be your definitive motherhood experience. Don't worry about what other people say. Don't worry about what your mother-in-law says. Don't worry about what your neighbor says. Just do you, boo. As Cody Rigsby says, just do you, boo. The other thing, allow yourself to practice self-care and fill your own cup. And this goes hand in hand with self-love and allowing yourself to own that you're not going to love every moment of motherhood, but you always need to be able to fill your own cup so that you can show up better for yourself. And as usual, I'm going to remind you that you are enough. You are enough. You're doing a great job and you're doing it with the information you have right now. Give yourself compassion. If you can't be self-compassionate, you cannot expect other people to show up that way for you. It starts within. It starts with you. Last but not least, I want to talk about perfectionism. The first time I read The Gifts of Imperfections by Brené Brown, I was pretty young and I wasn't a mom. I understood it from that perspective of a single young woman who was driven her career and trying to get ahead. And when I read it as a mother, I was able to see it so differently and still apply the same lessons, but on a different realm. So one thing about perfectionism is that perfectionism is not the same as striving to be your best. And it's not self-improvement. Striving to be a better version of yourself every day, that's self-improvement. And you can create the life that you envision for yourself. You can make these moves towards the direction of your dreams, and you can show up for yourself as the mom you envision yourself to be. That does not mean perfectionism. What I want you to think about is embrace the idea of being imperfect, but embrace the idea of being a constantly changing being who can be a better version tomorrow. I always reflect on the words of my high school principal, and she used to tell us, education is not the way to life. Education is life itself. So every day, as you're learning in life, every day you show up as a different person with the lessons you learned today. So case in point, today you might be hearing the concept of the good enough mother for the very first time or for the 70th time. But when you hear it different, and tomorrow you say, you know what, I'm going to embrace this idea of being good enough. So tomorrow you have more information than you did today, right? So you're going to work on self-improving without the constraints of trying to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. I know, coming from a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser, that took a lot of work for me to say that. But it truly, truly is a journey, and you have to give yourself grace. I want you to think about, who do you want to become? And when self-limiting thoughts creep in, I want you to ask yourself, what do I know to be true? And what is the story I'm telling myself? A lot of the time we build these narratives in our heads and we build these theories and stories and outcomes that don't even make any sense. Your reptile brain is just telling you 5,000 things, and you've decided that this is how it's going to be, and you just, you're just creating a story. So when you find yourself saying, well, I'm not a good enough mother, I didn't do X, Y, and Z for the bake sale, now I really, really suck. Is that really true? If you went to court, could you really prove that? No. So stop holding yourself to standards that don't even make any sense to yourself. Ask yourself, what are you telling yourself? And then question that thought or answer the question for yourself. And if it feels uncomfortable, then it's not true. Really, really think about that. One thing I will say is that as we define ourselves and who we are, it's important that we look at ourselves from the lens we were before we were mothers, but now perceive ourselves as parents. And what I mean by that is before you were a mother, you had all these goals and you had all these visions, and those change. But the person who was driven by those goals and visions is still there. Now apply those goals and visions towards a version of you that you want to become now that you're a mom. For me, it looks like trying to find other things to do that fulfill me and not necessarily in my career, which before I had my daughter, I was very driven in my career. And I've given myself permission to be okay with that because I wasn't okay with that for a long time. I felt that I was neglecting myself and who I was. Another thing that I want to talk about before I conclude this episode is allow yourself to be okay with the days when you don't love being a mom. And I say this with all the love I can say this with. There have been this drive to enjoy every minute. They grow so fast. Enjoy every minute. Enjoy every minute. And then I'm like, well, I didn't enjoy these last 5 minutes. My kid's throwing a tantrum. I want to sleep. I'm tired. And if I say that, then I feel like I'm going to be judged because, well, you wanted to be a mom. Don't you want to have kids? I can enjoy being a mom and I can also not enjoy every minute of it, right? And I'll conclude this with a conversation that I had with a friend who had had a couple of miscarriages and then had a little girl. She was going through something and she mentioned to me that she was feeling guilty because she was annoyed because the baby was not sleeping and she was frustrated. And she just felt like, how dare I feel frustrated and upset, yet I so wanted this child. This is my rainbow baby. I wanted this child. And in that moment, I was like, but you have to allow yourself to feel the things that you're feeling right now. And you're tired and you're frustrated. And it doesn't mean you don't appreciate your child. Could we please normalize not enjoying every second of motherhood? Could we do that? Please? Thank you. Because it doesn't mean we hate our kids or we hate being moms. It's just not feasible to love every moment of it. We don't love the days when they're sick, right? It doesn't mean we don't love them. We just don't want them to suffer. And then there are days when, like my toddler, I mean, no matter what I say or do, I'm just not meeting her at her point of need, and her upstairs brain and her downstairs brain are not engaging. And I just, throw my hands up and I'm like, okay, well, I guess today I'm just going to take my losses and just go with it. Just allow yourself to parent from the version of parenting that works for you. And forget what society is telling you, forget what social media is telling you, forget what Pinterest is telling you, and just be and allow yourself to be. In conclusion, there you have it. I have introduced you to the idea of the good enough mother, and I hope that it maybe sparks in you the thought that maybe you should be defining what motherhood looks like for yourself and not worry about what anybody else is. Not even what I say, because maybe it doesn't even matter. But I've introduced you to the idea that you can set your own negotiables and your non-negotiables and go with it. Give yourself grace and pay attention to your self-critique. You now have the tools to set the stage for your journey as a good enough mom. Download the Good Enough Mother Action Guide at stethoscopestoswaddles.com/good enough mom. This action guide contains affirmation and journal prompts to help you with practicing self-compassion and reminding yourself that you are good enough. I created this with you in mind, and the affirmations there are also helpful in helping you get started so you don't have to, think through the affirmations. We've talked about affirmations in previous episodes, so I can't wait to hear what you think of it. I'll see you next week. Bye.